Chosen one? Perhaps they ignored you, discarded you, treated you as if your presence were a nuisance, and in many moments you questioned if the problem was you. But now the time has come to see the truth. You were never rejected because you were insufficient, but because your presence was always too strong for those who were not ready to handle it. What seemed like a curse was, in fact, a disguised protection, a necessary distancing so that you could grow stronger without being contaminated by a world that never wanted you to realize your true power. If this message resonates within you, it is time to affirm that you understand the purpose behind it all. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to continue receiving revelations that will strengthen your path. And in the comments, write the number 777 to declare that you were not rejected, but protected, and that now you walk with clarity and unshakable strength. At first, the pain of loneliness was intense, suffocating, as if they had ripped away everything that gave you a sense of belonging. You felt the weight of silence, the emptiness of having no one to validate your existence. And for a while, you may have believed that this was a punishment, a penalty for not being like others. But something began to change within you, because in the midst of this apparent darkness, a new clarity began to emerge. The absence of distractions, of others' opinions, of external influences forced you to look inward and find something that was previously hidden, an inner strength that had always existed but never had the space to grow while you were still trying to fit into a world that was not yours. What once seemed like a burden became the greatest blessing they could have given you, because loneliness did not destroy you. It rebuilt you. Now you notice things that once went unnoticed, you feel the weight of intentions around you, and you understand that isolation did not distance you from life, but from the illusions that prevented you from seeing who you truly are. They tried to break you, but they failed, because what emerged from this forced silence was a being who can no longer be manipulated, controlled, or convinced that they need others' acceptance to exist. What was an exile has transformed into a rebirth, and now, for the first time, you walk with a certainty that no one can take away. You not only survived, you became invincible. There was a moment when everything began to change, when the connections that seemed solid began to crumble, and the people around you started to drift away for no apparent reason. Perhaps it was a series of unexpected events, betrayals that came from where you least expected, or simply the feeling that no matter how hard you tried to fit in, something always pushed you away. At first, you tried to resist, fought to understand what was happening, and wondered what you had done wrong. But as time passed, it became clear that the distancing was not a coincidence, but an inevitable shift, a change that was forcing you to see reality in a completely new way. Loneliness arrived without warning, and the shock of realizing that those you trusted were no longer by your side was a heavy burden to bear. You tried to rationalize, to justify, to believe it was just a phase and that everything would return to normal. But it didn't. The more you tried to hold on to what you knew, the more evident it became that something was being ripped from your life and that you had no control over it. Some people left quietly, others left open wounds, and what was once familiar became a strange and uncomfortable void. For a while, the pain of isolation was intense, and you wondered if you had been forgotten. It seemed unfair to see those who pushed you away continue with their lives as if nothing had happened, while you carried a weight you never asked for. But gradually, you began to notice something you had never seen before. Far from all the distractions, without the influence of those who always tried to mold you in their own way, you began to hear your own voice. Clarity came like a slow awakening, A process that, at first, seemed like just more pain, but over time revealed truths that had been hidden before. You realized that loneliness was not a punishment, but an opportunity to see more deeply. Before, the presence of certain people masked reality, and their energies blended with yours without you noticing. Now, with no one to fill that space, you began to distinguish what truly came from you and what was merely a projection of others. The situations that once seemed unfair began to make sense. The distancing, as painful as it was clearing your path, eliminating influences that limited your growth. The relationships that crumbled were not as strong as they seemed, and this became clear when you looked back and saw the patterns that had always existed, but that you had refused to see before. People who were only around when they needed something, friendships sustained by convenience, bonds based on appearances rather than genuine loyalty. You lost nothing. You were simply forced to see the truth. And that truth, however uncomfortable, brought with it an unexpected gift: the freedom to no longer carry relationships that, deep down, were never authentic. It was at this moment that everything began to change. The pain of isolation began to transform into something different. The inner voice that was once drowned out by others' opinions grew stronger, and the certainty that you did not need others' acceptance to exist began to grow. For the first time, you felt the weight of others' expectations fading, and in its place emerged something new. A confidence that did not come from external validation, but from the simple fact that, finally, you were seeing things as they truly were. The distancing pushed you into unknown territory, but it was in this solitary space that you discovered something no one could teach you: the ability to be self-sufficient. What seemed like the end of everything you knew was, in fact, the beginning of a new phase, where you no longer needed to strive to fit in, because you finally realized that you never needed that to be complete. They tried to break you by pushing you away, but they only gave you the time you needed to discover that, alone, you became someone impossible to stop. Over time, something began to change. What once seemed like unbearable emptiness began to transform into space. The silence, once crushing, became an opportunity to hear thoughts that were once drowned out by external noise. You began to notice that, without so many influences around you, your mind became clearer, your feelings sharper, and your decisions more conscious. Gradually, the weight of loneliness gave way to an unexpected sense of freedom, as if, for the first time, you were in control of your own life without needing to follow expectations that were never yours. It was in this solitary space that you realized how conditioned you were to seek acceptance. For a long time, without realizing it, you shaped your identity based on what others expected of you, trying to fit into roles that were never yours. Now, with no one to influence you, you began to ask yourself, "Who am I when I'm not trying to please anyone?" This question echoed within you and revealed truths that had been hidden before. Every choice you made just to be accepted, every moment you sacrificed your essence to fit in, now seemed distant and meaningless. Looking back, you realized that many of the relationships you lost were not truly losses, but liberations. The time alone allowed you to see what you once refused to accept. There were people around you who only benefited from your presence, but were never truly there for you. The distancing was the filter that revealed who really mattered, and who was only there for convenience. This understanding brought pain, but also liberation. You realized that you never needed external approval to exist, and that your identity does not depend on anyone else's recognition. The process of finding yourself in isolation was challenging but necessary. Gradually, you began to realize that your energy was valuable. and that not everyone was worthy of it. You came to understand that being alone did not mean being lost, but being in a space where you could finally rebuild yourself in the right way. Each moment of introspection became a step toward a new version of yourself, stronger, more aware, and more resilient. You realized that isolation was not a punishment, but training, an opportunity to become someone who could no longer be manipulated or controlled. Gradually, the need to prove something to others disappeared. You stopped seeking answers outside and began to find them within. You were no longer influenced by the need for acceptance or the fear of rejection, because now you understood that your journey did not depend on others' validation. Your mind became sharper, your intuition stronger, and your perception clearer. What once seemed like a crisis now revealed itself as a rebirth, an awakening to a new way of existing, where your independence became your greatest strength. And then came the final transformation, the certainty that being alone was never a problem, but a gift. You realized that your strength never came from others, but from everything you endured to get here. While many despair when they are alone, you found peace in your own company. While others lose themselves trying to fit in, you found yourself by stepping away. What once seemed like forced isolation has now become a conscious choice. You no longer need crowds around you, because you have learned that your strength comes from within, not from the external world. The greatest irony is that those who tried to push you away did not realize they were setting you free. They wanted you to feel weak, lost, insignificant, but by pushing you away, they gave you the chance to rebuild yourself far from the illusions that tried to imprison you. Now, you are no longer the same. What once affected you no longer has power over you. Pain turned into learning, loneliness became strength, and rejection became the key to your independence. They tried to break you, but they made you invincible. When you returned to interacting with the world, you noticed that something fundamental had changed. The situations that once triggered insecurity now seemed insignificant, and the people who used to affect you no longer had power over you. What was once seen as a need for acceptance disappeared, replaced by an unshakable certainty about who you are. Those who once discarded you began to notice this difference, but it was too late. You no longer sought validation, no longer expected recognition, and most importantly, no longer cared about the opinions of those who never understood your journey. The tables turned in a way they never imagined. The same people who rejected you now seemed uncomfortable seeing you so firm, so indifferent to their presence. Before, you worried about what they thought, analyzed their words, tried to understand their behaviors. Now, you simply observe, without haste, without resentment, but also without allowing any external influence. The difference is that this time, there is no going back. You don't need to prove anything, you don't strive to be accepted, because you finally understand that your presence is a privilege that few know how to value. The independence you developed became your greatest protection. While many still live for social approval, trapped in the fear of being excluded, you found power in the freedom of not needing anyone to feel complete. They don't know how to handle this. Your silence bothers them, your tranquility disturbs them, your confidence destabilizes them. Before, they knew how to hurt you, they knew your weaknesses, but now they realize that any attempt to manipulate or bring you down has become useless. You have become impenetrable to those who once had control over you. The masks have fallen, and now you see everything with clarity. The hidden intentions of people, the emotional games that once went unnoticed, the energies disguised under kind words. All of this is now visible to you. This new perception makes your presence uncomfortable for those who still live in lies. You don't need to expose anyone, because your mere existence forces others to face their own truth. Your gaze carries a weight that did not exist before, because now you no longer fear rejection. You have learned that being alone was never the problem, but a privilege. What was once your greatest pain has become your greatest strength. Loneliness not only strengthened you, but gave you an advantage over those who never dared to face it. You can walk alone without fear. You can stay in silence without needing distractions. You can choose with whom you share your energy without feeling guilt. You now understand the value of your presence and do not give yourself to just anyone. This is not arrogance. It is awareness. You know what you went through to get here, and there is no more room for superficial connections or empty relationships. You have learned to protect yourself and to value your peace above all else. People sense this change, even if they can't explain it. They notice that you no longer engage in the same dramas, that you don't react as you used to, that provocations no longer shake you. This intrigues them and, at the same time, frightens them. Some try to reconnect, not because they truly care, but because they feel they've lost access to you. But you're no longer who you used to be. You've learned that some doors, once closed, should never be reopened. Time away taught you that some connections only existed because you didn't yet know your own worth. Now, everything has changed. You've become what they feared most. Someone free. Someone impossible to control. Someone who needs nothing but their own presence to feel complete. They tried to break you, thinking that by pushing you away, they would weaken you. But all they did was give you the space you needed to become someone who can never be brought down. Now, you decide who enters and who leaves your life. You chart your own path without needing permission. What once destroyed, you now strengthens you. You've finally understood. Being alone was never a problem. It was your liberation. Now, everything around you seems different. Not because the world has changed, but because your perception will never be the same again. You walk through the same places and encounter the same people, but nothing affects you the way it once did. The opinions that once weighed on your shoulders are now just distant noises, unable to alter the certainty you carry within. The old insecurities have vanished, and what once seemed like an endless search for belonging has transformed into a deep tranquility of someone who finally understands they never needed anyone to be complete. You've learned to be with yourself without feeling emptiness, and that is one of the greatest strengths anyone can have. The loneliness that once felt like a burden has now become a privilege that few can endure. You look around and realize that most people still live for others' approval, constantly seeking some form of validation to feel sufficient. But you no longer need that. Time away taught you that true peace doesn't come from external recognition, but from the freedom of not having to prove anything to anyone. Now, you make choices for yourself, without fear of judgment, without worrying about what others will think. Your life no longer revolves around external expectations because you've learned to respect your own truth above all else. The energy around you has changed, and this makes those who once tried to control you now feel uncomfortable in your presence. They sense that something about you is different, but they can't quite understand what it is. They feel they no longer have access to your mind, that their words no longer have an impact, that their provocations no longer elicit reactions from you. This unsettles them because they're used to a world where everyone still plays the same game. But you've stepped out of that cycle. You no longer engage in unnecessary conflicts, no longer lose yourself in empty arguments, no longer yield to manipulations disguised as concern. Your silence speaks louder than any words, and, ironically, those who once ignored you now feel your absence as a weight. They didn't expect you to become untouchable, that the one they once sought to diminish would now be someone completely out of their reach. Some people try to reconnect, but not because they truly care. It's because they feel they've lost something valuable. But you no longer have time for emotional games, for superficial bonds that only exist as long as there's something to be taken from you. You now understand the value of your presence and choose carefully where to invest your energy. You've finally realized that being alone was never the problem, because those who truly care would never abandon you, and those who left only proved they were never truly by your side. This discernment has changed everything, because now you know how to distinguish authentic connections from relationships based on convenience. You no longer fall for illusions, no longer let yourself be deceived by pretty words without actions to back them up. You've become selective, not out of arrogance, but because you know your energy is too precious to be wasted on those who don't know how to value it. What once seemed like cruel isolation has revealed itself as liberation, because it was in this time alone that you learned what no one could have taught you. Loneliness was your greatest teacher, showing you that you don't need crowds to feel strong. You don't need constant companionship to feel complete. You've developed an emotional independence that few possess, and this places you in a position of power that others cannot comprehend. Now, you walk through the world with a certainty that nothing can shake. You need nothing but your own presence to move forward. And this new reality has brought you something that once seemed impossible: peace. Not a forced peace created to mask insecurities, but a genuine peace that comes from the certainty that you can be alone and still feel whole. You no longer seek distractions to fill the silence, because you've learned that it's in silence that the greatest answers are found. You no longer fear being misunderstood, because you've finally realized that those who truly see your value will always find their way to you. What once seemed like your greatest weakness has become your greatest strength, and now no one can stop you. You realize that what once hurt you no longer has any effect. The words that once destabilized you no longer find space to penetrate your mind, and the situations that once caused anguish now seem insignificant. You've become someone who observes but doesn't engage, who understands but isn't affected, who feels but isn't consumed. This new state of consciousness places you in a position that few reach, because while many still struggle to be accepted, you've finally understood that true strength comes from the ability to walk alone without fear. Time has taught you that. People project their weaknesses onto those they cannot control. When they realized you wouldn't mold yourself to their expectations, they tried to erase you, devalue your presence, make you feel inadequate. But now, looking back, it all makes sense. You see that the distancing wasn't a mistake, but a necessary process for you to break free from everything that limited your essence. What seemed like rejection was, in fact, a liberation, because it removed you from those who never truly saw you for who you are. Now, you no longer feel anger or resentment, because you understand that every situation was an essential piece of your growth. You no longer need to look back trying to understand why everything happened the way it did, because you finally realized it was never about loss, but about evolution. You've become someone who no longer needs the same answers, because you've found within yourself everything you once sought in others. And this awareness makes you invulnerable, because your peace no longer depends on anything external, but on the certainty that being alone was never a problem. It was your greatest blessing. Those who once discarded you now watch you from a distance, but they can no longer get close. You realize that those who once underestimated you now feel the weight of your absence, but it no longer matters. You don't seek revenge. You don't wait for recognition, because your victory isn't in proving anything to anyone, but in having become someone who can no longer be affected by their actions. You don't need validation, because true power isn't in being accepted, but in being free, and that freedom is something no one can ever take from you. The greatest irony is that, in trying to break you, they only made you stronger. When they tried to exclude you, they only taught you to be self-sufficient. When they tried to make you feel small, they only awakened in you a sense of identity that can never be erased. Now, you no longer worry about being understood, because you know that those who truly see beyond appearances will always recognize your true essence. You no longer need to chase after anything, because everything that is true will come to you at the right time, effortlessly, without struggle, without resistance. And then, finally, freedom becomes real. You no longer dwell on what you've lost, because you realize none of it was ever truly yours to begin with. You no longer carry unnecessary weight, because you've learned that life always removes what doesn't belong to you before giving you what is truly yours. You no longer feel isolated, because you understand that true connection doesn't come from the number of people around you, but from the quality of the energies you choose to allow into your life. You didn't just survive, you were reborn, and now nothing can stop you. They tried to break you, thinking that by pushing you away, they would weaken you. But all they did was free you from the chains that once bound you. Now, you walk without fear, without haste, without the need to fit into a world that was never made for you. You've become something no one can manipulate, something no one can imprison. You've become someone complete on your own, someone who found their greatest strength in solitude. And that strength is now unbreakable. Chosen one, now you know that everything you went through wasn't a punishment, but a process that forged you for something much greater. Every betrayal, every distancing, every moment of silence was an essential piece in making you who you are today. You're no longer the same person who once sought acceptance, because now you understand that you don't need anyone to validate your existence. What seemed like a lonely journey was, in fact, the awakening of your true strength. Now, nothing can touch you, because you no longer bend to the world's expectations. You chart your own path. Now that you've understood the truth about your journey, take action. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with another chosen one who needs this message. In the comments, write the number 777 to affirm that you've been reborn, that you no longer seek external acceptance, and that your journey is stronger than ever. And for those who want to support this work and help this message reach even more people, consider supporting through the Buy Me a Coffee link. This is a space created to keep this mission alive, because every contribution strengthens this path of self-discovery and truth. Now, before you leave, there's something more you need to hear. The next recommended video on the screen has information that can deepen this journey even further and give you more clarity about what's happening around you. Click now and continue absorbing the knowledge that can transform everything around you. Chosen one, never forget. You are not alone. You never were, and you never will be. See you in the next video, and may God always bless you.